Welcome to this webinar on AI and vocabulary. Today I have Sarah Schuman with me. I'm Ashley Haken. I'm a technology integration specialist with the Southwest West Central Cooperative. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your role?
Yeah, my name is Sarah, and I'm the Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment Coordinator for Worthington District 518, and I work primarily with grades 6 through 12.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us today. So on today's agenda, we are going to go over how vocabulary develops with students, and we're going to talk about an instructional shift and how we can use AI to redesign vocabulary assessments. Today, we're going to talk about the science of reading, and I am going to let Sarah discuss and share her knowledge regarding this.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So another part of my role here in Worthington is a letters facilitator. And as we've learned more about the science of reading, one of the really big theoretical models is the simple view of reading. The simple view of reading really points out that reading comprehension is a product of both word recognition, being able to lift the words off the page, as well as that language comprehension. And a reader needs a strong foundation in both areas to be able to become a skilled reader with strong reading comprehension. Next slide.
Perfect.
Scarborough's reading rope really breaks it down a little bit further. So you can see word recognition at the bottom and those components, as well as language comprehension at the top. There's lots of different components. Reading is, like Louisa Moats would say, rocket science. And you'll notice background knowledge and vocabulary, if you want to click again, right there in the language comprehension. In a 2006 study by Stahl and Nagy, they found that vocabulary accounts for approximately 55% of the variance in reading comprehension. So with vocabulary and background being so important, it's really within becoming a skilled reader, we need to know how to teach it well for our students. You can go to the next slide. So when we take a look at how vocabulary develops, there's just some really kind of key points to keep in mind. So first, students are going to learn best through explicit instruction, providing clear, student-friendly explanations. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I had to look up words in the dictionary, and I'd look it up. And as I looked it up, I was like, well, what does that word mean? And I had to look up several other words to figure out that original word. So make it easier for students and give them a friendly definition helps that process. With semantic mapping, brain research shows that we store words in our brain by content or by category or by that concepts. So for example, the word top might be stored in a part of your brain with other location words, top, bottom, around. It could be stored with clothing, top, bottom, shirt, skirt, or it could even be stored with circus words, the big top. And students need to know definitions of those and meanings of those across different concepts. When we talk about multiple exposures, just like I said, because words are stored in the brain by category, it's important to have students learn those words in context so that they're just not memorizing one definition. Lots of words have multiple meanings, and so teaching those explicitly and giving kids opportunities to see those words in content or in context is very important. I can't emphasize the within context enough, especially when we get to middle school. I used to teach 6th grade science, and when my students were doing things about graphing, they'd say, wait a second, this is like math. Yes, it is. They see these words across content, and so it's important that we give them those exposures. Next, contextualized use. Students need to be able to hear, speak, read, and write these words, so we also need to give them opportunities to use them in all those different domains. And lastly, active processing. being able to allow kids to explain, compare, select, justify really helps them develop a deeper knowledge of words, not just recognizing it in print or being able to get the gist of the meaning in context, but being able to use it independently. I love the word cacophony, and I saw it in print once, had to look it up, and then I saw it all the time. If you don't know what cacophony is, it's a really loud sound within like a hallway. And so vocabulary is not something that can be memorized. Really deep vocabulary knowledge is learned through meaning, use, connection, and within context.
Do you ever find it interesting how like you had never noticed a word before, but when you learn it, like you see it all over then?
Oh, absolutely, because you've got that deep knowledge, right? I'm sure I'd come across the word cacophony, but I didn't know it. And once I actually learned that word, I literally see it all the time now.
Exactly.
And
It's
so
great.
it is crazy how that pops up.
For sure. All right. So this brings us to talking about this instructional shift. In my role, I deal a lot with AI, and I hear a lot of teachers talking about, especially nowadays with how prevalent it's become, students using, especially at the older grades, using AI to do their assignments for them. So we know that our traditional assessment methods for assessing vocabulary have kind of fallen along the lines of define, kids memorize them, we quiz them, and we often forget them. I know I did it as a student. I remember studying those definitions to get through the vocab quiz growing up. And I know I've done quizzes similar to this when I was teaching, where it's like fill in the blank or match it to its term or definition. But with this instructional shift, we have to think about how AI can replace that so easily. So we see a lot of the current assessments, matching, fill in the blanks, the synonyms, isolated sentence writing, crossword puzzles, word finds. What are the place for those in education, do you think, Sarah? Do they have a place when we know that everything is kind of shifting, or what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, like I said, the brain research really shows that you want to learn those words in context. I don't think there is reason to throw out these things, but we also need to give students that opportunity to go deeper. If I'm only doing crossword puzzles and then testing kids on their definitions, they're not going to recall that later on. And I'm going to spend time reteaching and kind of get frustrated that they don't know it. If I'm only doing fill in the blanks on my assessments, are they guessing? Or do they really know how to use that, and can they use it independently in context? So I think you can use these as like an intro, or especially if it's got some meaning behind it. But if this is all you're using, we really want to move past that and go deeper so that kids develop that deeper understanding of the words.
So, like I stated before, that this stuff is easily replaceable by AI. So, it is easy to create with AI. It's easy to create these types of assessments, but in that same line, it's also easy for students to use AI to complete it for them. And with that in mind, we want to start thinking like, the science of reading and how can we change how we are designing our assessments. I think we're at a really good crux in education where all this science of reading has been introduced. At least teachers in the state of Minnesota are going through a lot of training with it. We have a lot of AI coming out. So how can we blend these two to really start shifting our assessment processes and how we are instructing students? So with that, I see this as we have an opportunity to change our assessments, to expose them to more, personalize their experiences, give them more of that contextualized practice, let them transfer that knowledge, and eventually they can reflect on it. And like you said, with your cacophony, we see those words out all the time, and it just becomes a natural part of our language progression.
And learning those words in context provides more relevancy. Kids see more purpose. Filling out a crossword puzzle, doing some of those other assessments that were listed, sometimes that doesn't provide that meaning, and you might see kids not doing them. really giving them authentic ways to assess is kind of the shift as well.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I hear teachers talking about is they have concerns with AI and students not retaining that cognitive load. So when I go through some of these next slides, I have done this in mind with we're designing things because we want students to retain that cognitive load. We don't want AI to do it for them, whether it be through traditional assessments or something a little more advanced. So with that, navigate forward. I kind of broke this down. I think of it into two phases when we think about AI and the science of learning being embedded together. Phase one is our learning phase. This is where we are teaching the vocab, but this is also where we are kind of using AI to help supplement what we are doing. So this might be where we start clarifying the definitions, we're generating those examples, we're comparing the related words. Everything that you talked about earlier is really coming back into play at this point. We have that feedback loop, and they're building those semantic connections within their brains, whether we're at the circus or, wherever we're at to talk about top. And then the next phase would be how we demonstrate that knowledge. And this is where that big shift in assessment is coming. We are moving away from, or we're trying to move away from those traditional assessments of fill in the blanks and synonyms, and have a deeper level. And this is where I would argue that we are going to limit our AI or restrict our AI because we want kids to retain that cognitive load. This is where they're going to apply their vocabulary in writing. They're going to analyze word choices. They're going to transfer the vocabulary to new contexts, explain their word choices. So we're really putting a lot of it on them to take their knowledge and run with it. Go out, big world. So I broke this down into some examples. So if we do phase one for K-5, I would emphasize greatly that this is teacher-led at this point when we use AI to support the science of reading in our classroom. It is not something we are given to our younger learners and letting our younger learners use AI to explore. But rather, our teachers are going to use this to help them generate things that help them teach within their classroom. Maybe it's stories that are using embedded vocabulary. They can create visuals and gestures, ways to get kids up moving, oral practice prompts, student-friendly definitions, the ones you kind of talked about earlier. So we're not looking in a dictionary to go define a word we found in the dictionary, that waterfall cascade effect. Generate more examples, comparing similar words, and additional practices. I would say the teacher will use most of that, or maybe show it up on the board how they're using it to help generate things, but the students will not have any hands in it. And then we move on to the assessments. So what the assessments now do, transfer from our worksheets or other traditional assessments that we've done and now move to the oral explanations. We're acting out the words. They could do picture-based applications. Again, this is all grade and age appropriate. And then as they move older, they might start writing with that word integration. They might sort and justify their words. They start putting the words within context and explanations, which kind of leads me to my next question of this. Between planning and executing some of these assessments, they do take a little longer. One of the nice things that I know a lot of teachers appreciate when they create some of those traditional assessments is you can use something like Google Forms to create the multiple choice or the matching. Schoology has built-in assessment features. Those computers automatically grade that stuff, which is very convenient for teachers who have large class loads and many kids coming through their classrooms in a day. How would you encourage teachers to switch from the traditional model of assessment to an assessment model like this, knowing this probably is going to take a little more time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and a great thing to think about within your context, right? It's really prioritizing what do you want the outcome to be? What do you want kids to take away? If you are using a Google form, I did that myself to get a really quick snapshot of, do kids know these words within like a recall situation? Again, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't stop there. We're using the words within short writing. You're having them do a class sort. You are having kids spend a few minutes having them talk about and developing meaning and sharing out. I think those things all take time up front, but then later on, you're saving time because they really know those words and they can use them in context. I bring it back to my school had an initiative about vocabulary, specifically tier 2 words, where it was things that you might see on an assessment. So what's the difference between list and explain? And I can't tell you how many times I had to tell my students, list is just a bulleted list of items. You don't need to write sentences. It's just 1, 2 words or a short phrase. I don't know, a couple months later, they would see list on an assessment or list on an assignment, and they would go, yes, I don't have to write complete sentences, because they knew what the expectations were. Same way with describe versus explain. Teaching kids what that means in context can then be used across all content areas, and you're saving yourself grading time because they knew the expectations, they were able to do it. As well as the frustration of then, oh, I have to pull this group again and reteach what exam or explain means. So taking that time up front does take a little bit more time, but the payoff in the end, when they really have a deep knowledge of that word, I think is worth it. Working with your team, if you've got planning partners, working within a PLC to kind of share some of the workload in terms of that planning is also really helpful. And then I think you'll jump into some ways that AI can also provide some of the work that you don't have to do to kind of shorten, to create a couple of shortcuts.
You know, some things you said reminded me. One thing that we haven't pointed out yet is when we're doing these, we're embedding other skills. So we're embedding writing skills, not just vocabulary. So they're practicing writing at the same time. Think of like your EL students who need more opportunities to speak and listen in the classroom. These are providing some of those opportunities as well. So in the end, we're not just assessing the vocabulary, we're really providing such a rich learning environment for them to practice a lot of skills that are going to be so applicable as they continue in education.
Absolutely. And I think when you start to examine the Minnesota state standards, a lot of them have moved away from just understanding of things and memorizing things into really taking that application and into those higher levels.
Mm-hmm. So we kind of veered there, but I love it because it's a really good conversation to have. It's, I think, applicable to any grades we look at, even as we move into like the 6 to 12, for example. So we can look at AI vocabulary for kids in grades 6 to 12. And as we move to this stage, we might start moving it to a little more student-led. So remember in K-5, we had our teachers using AI to really help them do the planning for a variety of ways to help support practices of science of learning with vocabulary. But now as our kids grow, we're going to kind of release them. At 6th grade, I wouldn't give them free rein with AI. They still need to be taught. But we can start introducing. And as they get a little older, we can maybe let them experience AI within like a chatbot realm or something with guardrails where we have set it up, but it's pretty specific. And as they grow, then they can have a little more freedom. But again, we're using this as the learning phase, not the assessment phase. So at this point, we can give them words, but they can use the AI to study the word parts, for example, maybe break them apart, learn like the deeper, richer meanings of these word parts. And then you can, again, start relating it to other contexts, comparing those connotations. They can get the feedback on their usage. If you set a chatbot up, it can be that feedback loop. So they can put it in, does this make sense when I type it? And it can be like, no, yes, whatever. And give them feedback that maybe as teachers we can't always immediately give because we have a lot of kids. We can explore shades of meaning. I kind of like this one. I used to do a shades of meaning example or activities with kids where we actually use paint chips. and they had to talk about the strength of words and rank them within there and try to explain that. Kids can now use AI as a way to also do that, but it doesn't have to be strictly that. We can continue to refine our word choices. They can embed their vocabulary in arguments. So if you want to do a class discussion or debates, but encourage them that they have to use the vocab that you just learned, they can practice that before you do a class debate. And that would be a safe environment, that AI would provide that safe environment, which then goes into that assessment where, again, going back to the age-appropriate examples, they're doing more writing, they have more scenario-based applications they can use, they're doing the word comparison, they might have the oral defense, maybe you're doing that class argument and you can use that as part of your assessment when you're listening really closely. The argument writing, that's a higher level writing. We've seen the writing progress from K to 12 now as well. And a lot of this goes back to Bloom's taxonomy. So if we kind of click back to this slide, you'll notice a lot of the words are like analyze, compare, generate, explore, refine. And one thing I find very interesting when we think back to our earlier discussion on the traditional vocab assessments, they probably fell more down here on Bloom's taxonomy, but the verbs we're using are falling higher up on our Bloom's taxonomy pyramid. So I think that would argue that we are doing deeper learning, wouldn't you say, Sarah?
Yeah, I would, as when you can get students to apply or analyze or evaluate, that's where you're going to have that deeper learning. But like I mentioned earlier, there is a place for them to have some activities where it's just remembering and understanding before you jump into some of those higher level tasks.
I mean, it's important. They have to have the base knowledge.
Yes.
They're not going to be able to evaluate if they don't have the basic understanding first. So how do the science of reading and AI work together? If we're looking at it, we can assess with contextual use, the word precision, transferring to new contexts, the oral language. We have them explain. It's probably not an all-comprehensive list, but these are some. I'm not going to read it all, but it does show that they will align to the science of reading. And then here's some ways that at each level or kind of band that AI can strengthen that and help you as a teacher and or students. I'm not going to read through all of them, but if you're watching, feel free to take like a screenshot. Oops. So I am going to provide some examples at this point of how AI was used for that phase 1 process. Here's some K to 2 examples. So in this one, we wrote a very short story or write a short story using the word enormous, tired, and excited. So we talked about Barnaby Bear. And you could read it as a story. I know kids really kind of like pictures. So in this case, we had AI create a picture that related to that story. We could talk about what's enormous, how he looks excited. We could talk about the facial features that would show that he's excited. And then eventually we would move that to having students retell using those target words, and that aligns because they're using oral language and they're using them within context. Another K to 2 example is oral explanations. And this one, the AI was create child-friendly explanations of observe with gestures. In this case, at the end, the students will orally explain, and it aligns through oral language and repeated exposure. This allows our kids to get up and move as well. So in this case, they had cup your hands around your eyes. So as a teacher, you're probably going to do this and be really dramatic with it, but it makes it more fun. You could have the kids doing it and they could go observe things within the room. It allows kids to get up and move as well. A K to 3 example.
Can you go back a slide?
Sure.
I just want to point out too that the mini scientist explanation is where you could use that within context. So when you're observing in science, what does that mean? Or if you go outside for recess, let's observe our surroundings and have kids make those observations. And that's how you're using it throughout the day instead of just a one and done activity.
Mm-hmm. Imagine walking around all day doing this as you walk through the school. What are we observing? It could be
Mhm.
cute. All right. In K to 3 to 5, one of our examples could be like an explanation one. So in this one, it said, explain why exhausted is stronger than tired. In this, it gave an example of a battery scale. So you're trying to relate it to things kids might already be aware of. They might know batteries kind of wear out. Especially in our district, kids have iPads and they watch the batteries die. So they might be aware of this a little more than we think. So we could explain tired is maybe when your battery's kind of getting close. Exhausted is when you have no battery. There's no juice left. And then you could do other things. You could talk about why exhausted is stronger. There's more metaphors. In this case, it said, imagine a car. A car is tired on your low fuel light. You could have AI create images so that kids aren't just using words, that they see what a low fuel light on a car is. You could have them expand it. Have you ever seen the low fuel light on a car with parents or other family members when you're in there? Have you ever ran out of gas when you're driving? Some of us really like to push the limits there. That would be your car's exhausted. It's relating everything to some real life. At the end, students can explain the word choices. So you can have them decide exhausted or tired. And that could be like through a challenge. Have some upbeat music. The kids are going to dance around. Again, we're encouraging movement because kids only can sit so long. And then you'd pause and be like, what are you? And the kids would have to decide if they're tired or exhausted. And they'd have to be able to explain. So this is an assessment that you're kind of doing and paying attention to all those answers for while they go through. And in 6 to 12, I just kind of lumped these together. But this one was a scenario-based application one. And in this particular example, we give examples where ethical is applied. So ethical was given in 3 different examples of this one was the glitch, technology and honesty. The next one was social responsibility with like a group project. And then the third one was global awareness, fashion dilemma, sometimes called like fast fashion. Should we do it or not? And then after that, you have them use those examples and apply it to a new context where they have to describe, using that word, ethical ways to handle something. So in that case, they're applying that word to a new context. They're being able to transfer that knowledge. And in that, you're also getting to think critically, and which is also another great skill that we want them to have. Can they create arguments? Can they support their arguments? That all goes within those writing skills. So earlier when we asked of how do we encourage teachers to move to this assessment style, think we're not just assessing vocabulary here. We can assess other skills simultaneously.
I also want to add here that I actually did something similar to this when I taught 6th grade science, because we were talking about land usage and resources and how they're used across the globe. So there are ways to build this into your content. And once I taught that, I shared it with our English teacher or our team, and then they were able to use the word ethical in some of their classroom discussions. And so kids saw it across content areas, and they were able to have those deeper conversations. And English teachers didn't have to teach it to the same depth because they'd already seen it in science. So that's just some ways that your grade level teams or contents can work together to develop those deeper understandings among students.
Kind of makes me think like if cross-curricular teams had more time to connect, like what are you truly teaching and what can we make sure connects across things and who's going to do it? You could really provide for some deep learning experiences through this.
Absolutely. Being intentional is really helpful in that process.
With our next thing I'm going to do, we'll cut to it shortly. I'm going to show how we can create chatbots. So earlier I talked about how students can use chatbots to help support the learning process. We don't want kids to go anywhere on any AI and just kind of do it themselves. We want it done with purpose and with guardrails. But it can be productive because kids could use it as a tutor if we set it up in that way. We could use it as a feedback coach, where they can get immediate feedback, especially that's great if you have like 100 learners going through your classroom every day. Think of kids who might not have support at home. Could this be something where they're getting that support where they might not typically get it? They could have a practice partner, maybe like practicing a debate or something. It gives them that. And then semantic precision checker are all examples, not all inclusive. So we're going to show how to do that using Google Gemini Gem, because that's a very common tool that is available to schools within their Google Workspace for Education platform. All right, I have navigated to Gemini Gems. If you haven't been here before, you can access Gemini Gems at gemini.google.com/gems/view. Make sure you're signed into probably your school account. This is pretty standard for a lot of the Google Workspace for Education platforms. Now, if you recall, I said the purpose behind building a vocabulary chatbot could be to serve as a tutor, a practice partner, a feedback coach, or something like a semantic precision checker for students. But remember, we're not going to use this as an answer generator. It's not meant to be a shortcut tool, and right now we're not using it as a replacement for writing. We are trying to keep all of that cognitive load on our students. This is merely to help with that phase 1, that learning process of assessment. It is possible to set up chatbots in other commercial products such as Magic School or School AI. I did choose to use Gemini Gems simply because of its availability within the Google Workspace. The premise of these chatbots is going to be the same regardless of where you set it up, however. To get started, you can go create a gem by clicking on the left side where you'll see existing gems, and you can click New Gem. In this example, I'm just going to name it Academic Vocabulary Coach and maybe Unit 3. Whatever unit you would be on would work. Then we want to start including some descriptions. So if you have a particular description for your gem, explain what it is and what it does. If you have instructions, this is really the big meat and potatoes per se of the gem, and it's really important you add some details here. So in this example, I had a few basic pre-done things kind of written out already. I want it to ask the students to try sentences before giving feedback. I want it to provide corrective feedback, not rewrites. I want it to require an explanation of word meaning in context. Again, I'm not giving it a list of vocab. Remember, Gemini is going to be pulling from a lot from its current training. So me giving it a list right now is not necessary. I'm just creating a vocabulary coach. Now as we go through, you can choose a default tool. Because I'm using it as a learning guide, I do want to choose guided learning, and I think that just changes how it's prompting overall to our students. If you had a particular knowledge base you wanted to add, provide your own training data per se, maybe you had specific vocab from this unit you wanted to add, you would be able to add some files right here, and it would also reference those files when giving feedback to the students. So before I make this go live, I might want to check what it could do. Over here on the right side, we have the preview feature, and I could ask it, maybe from a student's perspective, I give them the words such as mitigate, and I could say explain mitigate in simple terms. And I say that, and it will overlook my typos, and it might give me an explanation. But see how it starts to prompt me? Write a sentence. Explain the meaning. Would you like to try that, or should we look at a different scenario first? It is trying to give us more prompts to help us through this process. Maybe a student doesn't quite fully understand something, and they write a sentence that might not fully incorporate the sentence accurately. For example, and it starts to give it feedback. Maybe redefines it, something bad or unpleasant. If you want to mitigate the feeling of your hair, it implies there's something about how it feels right now that's bothersome. So then it recoaches it. So we're getting that immediate feedback loop with it. Again, it's not entirely telling me how to fix it. It's providing correction and coaching through the process. So notice this gave me a sentence prompt because I struggled with it. I will blank to mitigate the blank feeling of my hair. So it's building off of what I have already given it. So I could say, I will put my hair up to mitigate the hurting feeling of my hair. No clue why I chose that, but we are. And so now it's giving us more of a positive feedback there, saying we're probably using it more correctly now. And now it is encouraging us to try again. So we're continuing to try these in context, other contexts, and recoaching. I think one thing that is really important to note throughout all of this is that it is not specifically just defining it for us, but we are bringing in that science of reading thought process with it. After I've gone through the preview, if I don't really love what I'm seeing here, I can go back and adjust the instructions. Maybe I want to say, we're giving it more context of what it should be looking for while it prompts students. Okay, if I go back through practice again and it is more along what I like, then I'm going to click Save. And we can start a chat. At that point, it will show up in your gems, and it looks like just a regular coach here where you would send this link to students and they would interact with it. As you become more and more comfortable with creating gems or other chatbots, your instructions become a lot more detailed. So I'm going to show you one example. All right, so we're looking here. It was a copy of one someone had created. I had permission to copy it. It's iterate until it's right. It gave a lot more typed out responses, details for what it wants in this particular one. If I scroll up, you can see just how much was really put into it. It described the SAMR process, what substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition was. Gave some credit. Jeremy Mikla was the one who kind of created this initially. And then other context that it needed to give. Let's take a moment to review what a chatbot is. Remember, a chatbot is a computer program designed to simulate conversation with human users. You're talking to it, it might sound pretty human-like back, but it's important to remember and remind students it's really not a human interacting with you. It's rule-based and scripted, meaning it uses paths and keyword triggers to provide answers. It's not looking information up on the internet, it's a prediction pattern. It's AI-powered and conversational. It uses that machine learning to understand context. It learns from your interactions, and therefore that's how it's able to simulate more natural human-like conversation. And the more information you give a chatbot, the better you are training it to give you some better responses. So what are some tips and tricks for chatbot instructions? When I did my example, I gave some pretty basic instructions. I would not say that's best practice. So let's look. You can define a persona. Describe who the gem is for. For example, you might say, you're a high school English teacher helping students study vocabulary. You're going to state the task. What should the gem do? For example, you might tell it, ask the students to try sentences before feedback, provide corrective feedback, not rewrites. See, these are the things that I put in my instructions, but remember, we're adding to these now. You're going to provide context, give that background information. We're creating a vocabulary study guide for high school students following the science of reading practices. And format and style. So if there's a specific way that information should be output, list it here. Maybe you want it to be given in bullet points, maybe there's specific word limits. And there's some other tips and tricks. You can do markdown formatting. You would use the, well, kids say hashtag, or the pound symbol, whatever you want to call it, and the word headers to separate sections, and that might be if you put instructions for students. You would bold something if it needs to be emphasized, and you can list things in steps using numbers or bulleted lists. You can also add in behavioral constraints for your chatbot. So if you want to give it rules, you can give it rules. For example, if you say, I don't want you to ever discuss topics outside of whatever it is you're creating your chatbot for, go for it. Tell it, so if I mention blah, 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 it's supposed to ignore it. That way, if the child or student gets off task, it's going to bring them back around. If the gem is missing information and it doesn't know the answer, which we know is definitely a possibility with AI, we don't want it to hallucinate. So try to give it instructions saying, if you don't know it, state you don't know it, but don't lie to me. And define if it should be conversational or direct. Like you can give it a few of those parameters. Lastly, if you're new to creating gems, there are resources out there that can help you get started. One might be edugems.ai.home. These are created by Eric Kurtz. He's made them a lot of times in conjunction with other like tech integrationists or other AI enthusiasts out there. He has a whole library of EduGems or Gemini Gems that have been created. So you can see some of the newest that have been added. You can scroll down and there's just a whole plethora of them. If you don't like scrolling because that's just too much, feel free to use the drop-down menu on the side where they have some slightly different organization. From there you can kind of see some that have already been put here. So maybe we look vocabulary tiers. We can see kind of what they did, what they set up. You can use the gem, or they have the link where you can make your own copy, where you can use it within your own Google platform. Once you're in there, if you make a copy of it, it's going to say copy, and you're going to be able to see all of the instructions that have been put in there. So here you're seeing that hashtag with your titles that separate your sections. You see numbered lists to set out a list for students so they see it. And just so on and so forth as you go down. Lots of instructions, it's the iteration loop, lots of training to give us more of a comprehensive tool. If I went back and looked at the gem, all that training would show me something like this. Categorize the words into tier 1, can read those. Gem is shared, so instructions may change. Thanks. And then you could interact with it that way. From there you can see the differences from how it looked versus how it was created. So the directions we read were this right here at the top. So if I want to enter a prompt, and based upon these instructions right here, I am starting to get some of this information given to me. So in this case, it kind of looks like it's geared towards teachers and not students, but you can always write yours in a similar fashion to be geared towards students.
Sarah, thank you for joining today. I appreciate your input on how the science of reading relates to vocabulary and how we can use that to support vocabulary and AI in our classrooms.
Absolutely. It was great to be here.